When we want to create change, we often want to have a model to guide us. Now, why is a model important? Well, some say it's not. Some people just create change without resorting to a model. You've explored models in your course, so you know that there are quite a few different kinds of models that are used in change management. I believe that change models are important because they help us to communicate the message. It gives, I guess, a template or a sense of direction and the components or stages of a change process that are important. Another thing is that if you're adopting a model, I guess you've assumed that it's been tested or validated somewhere in the world, in some kind of industry or society. So we have a sense of confidence that this particular approach is useful and will work. Let's listen to Tony talk about the models they used at Yarra Valley Water to guide them through the change process.
Yes, we've adopted a lot of models. We've adopted there's models that we've used to help our understanding, you know, things like the human synergistics model. We've used life cycle assessment for the environment and the human synergistics model I talked about before. And they've all been very useful for us to work out where we're at and where we need to get to. But in terms of making that transition, we've also used the Kata Model as well. More recently, the Kata Model has been very useful for us. One of the things that we're doing at the moment is turning over all of our IT systems. Now, that's important because it's not just actually IT, it's all of our business processes, and the IT just becomes the enabler. And in changing our processes, making them more customer friendly, etc., making them more cost effective, you know, it does mean quite dramatic changes in the work processes which affect individuals.
Having heard Tony describe the models he used at Yarra Valley Water, go back to your lecture notes, identify the change models that you're familiar with, and just see if you can plot Tony's description of the company and its progress through one or more of those models, in a sense for you to validate whether those models can be applied in practice. Early in the course, you actually talked about external versus internal change agents. And agents are the people who obviously create the change. And you heard that external agents have different characteristics or skill sets than those who are internal to the organisation. We asked Tony Kelly how the process was adopted at Yarra Valley, and you'll hear from the video that he first employed external change agents. So let's hear him describe that process, and then we'll come back and look at what happened after those external agents left.
So we've put a lot of time and effort into building our capabilities in change management. It started when we put our new billing system in, which for utilities are generally agonising, and ours was pretty agonising, but we got a good result in the end. And one of the reasons we did is because as part of the implementation of the billing system, we brought in a professional change management team. And they helped us through the implementation of the billing system. But in the process, we took the opportunity to learn from them.
You heard Tony talk about the external change agents. Now let's listen a bit further, because Tony goes on to describe how that function was transferred to internal staff, largely managed by the HR department.
And then we've made one of our own HR employees the change manager in Yarra Valley Water now. And so that person is responsible for creating the Yarra Valley Water change model, and then for coaching line managers in the implementation of that change management model. And we've taken a very strong stand on this, that it is the line manager's responsibility to manage change. It's not a third party, it's not the HR group, it is the line manager, but the line manager gets a lot of assistance and support from the organisation to help them implement the change.
Change often fails because there is resistance. Now, it could be people resisting, and this could be psychologically based because people are afraid of the new paradigm, the new approach, the new future. It could be organisational. There are aspects of the organisation that actually prevent change occurring. So this concept of resistance to change is quite central to the whole change process, and we need to understand it and, in a sense, be able to manage resistance to be successful as change agents. Not to say that resistance should be eliminated, because when somebody's resisting, it actually signals that something might not be right with the change process. So don't try to crush the resistance, try to manage it positively. We're going to listen to a short description from Tony Kelly about a situation where some people in Yarra Valley Water didn't want to go along that journey of change. In other words, they're resisting change, and we'll hear how Tony responded to that evidence of resistance.
The short answer to that is no. I think the organisation, the sort of people that are attracted to the water industry generally have a reasonably strong social conscience and a green conscience as well. It's the way it is, I think. So when we started setting up our sustainability strategy, it just rang true for a large percentage of our staff. And as the trust between the management and the staff increased, then they were able to exercise more input. They were able to put more into the strategy, work out how they were going to contribute, and that was all very productive. There were, though, I must say, there were some individuals that did resist, in a sense, or more passive resistance. If I go back to the cultural model that we adopted, the human synergistics model, that has two elements. It has a corporate version of that where all the staff fill out a survey and we get a result. There's a mini version of that which is applied to individuals, and that's very powerful because we can see where the organisation is, but we can also see where an individual is positioned. And I didn't care where an individual was positioned at the start, as long as they were progressing towards what we were trying to achieve corporately. And there were a couple of individuals that said all the right things, but really weren't with us in terms of going on our cultural journey. And in the end, they left the organisation. Had we not done that, if we'd not taken that stand, then it would have gone to the heart of our integrity around what we were committed to. It didn't happen many occasions, maybe less than a handful, but it was important for us to make those moves, to send a message to the staff that we were serious, and any managers that weren't coming along for the journey then weren't coming along for the journey.
So Tony said that some staff didn't want to come along on the journey and eventually they departed from the organisation. So there's one outcome of resistance, that the people who resist actually move on to other positions or to other companies. How else might you manage that resistance? How could you keep those people internal to the organisation but manage their resistance so they became adopters of the change rather than resistors? What other manifestations of resistance might you see in organisations, whether they be about a person, about a structure, about a culture? Think about all the possible resistance or blocking points to a change process in an organisation, and in our case, Yarra Valley Water. We've got a change process, we've got a plan, we've got the right kind of leadership, we know where we want to go. So the next step is to evaluate. Do we know that we're heading in the right direction? Possibilities are that the plan is not working at all. It's working but not as anticipated. In other words, we're getting a different outcome than what we had expected or planned for. It's working but it's awfully slow and therefore it's a problem. Or it's working and heading towards the right direction as we'd planned, but in the meantime the external environment has changed, and so where we thought we should be going is no longer relevant because of the changes in competitors or other aspects of the environment. So we need ways to evaluate the change, both in a formative sense, in other words, as we go through the change process, what can we measure, what can we observe in our staff, in our processes, to indicate that we're heading in the right direction, on track with our budget, our timelines, etc. And we also need some kind of summative evaluation at the end. Did it work? At what cost? And for what outcome? So evaluation requires measurement of some kinds of data elements. Now, in many ways, they are quantitative. In this case study, you'll hear Tony Kelly talking about various variables that they measure and that are quite quantitative. But there's also a lot of less measurable, more qualitative concepts that you can bring into a case study. So think about an organisation like Yarra Valley Water. What could you observe in a non-quantitative way that gives you confidence that things are moving in the right direction? So with those thoughts in mind, let's again listen to Tony and let's hear his description of how he monitored and evaluated the change at Yarra Valley.
Well, I'd come straight back into the effectiveness of our strategy. You know, if we're delivering the outcomes in our strategy, then it's working. Because the strategy, is not easy by any means. It requires us to work together. It requires us to be innovative. It requires us to be cost efficient. If the strategies, if we're delivering on a strategy, I know the culture is going in the right direction. On top of that, we also, we measure everything. It's like we've got pages and pages of key performance indicators. We've got an extensive strategy scorecard, which is measured up every month. It's a 5-year thing, but it's still measured up every month. We do an annual review of that, and we do a sort of a 2-3 year review, a midterm review on that as well. That information goes to our board as well, so the board monitors the same information. But it also cascades down into our performance plans. So, my performance plan has a strategy scorecard in it. Same for my direct reports, and all the managers, have got KPIs in their performance plans, and their performance pay, to a large extent, is based on the achievement of the outcomes in that plan. So, it's very embedded, we've worked very hard to make it very clear to people what's expected of them.
Now, what Tony was just describing in that part of the video was some fairly tangible or quantitative ways of evaluating whether change was working. He also talks about a concept or a tool called the Human Synergistics model. Now, you can find a link to that on MyRMIT, and he refers to it as an important tool they use in the change process. Listen now to him talking about how that was embedded into their evaluation process. And he's now talking about, in a sense, the less tangible, less quantifiable concepts in change management and identifying resistance.
There's always less tangible outcomes, which are more of a challenge. So it's easier to measure, did you build that project or didn't you?
Yes.
That's quite straightforward. There's always the intangibles around behaviours. But again, we do try and measure those things through the Human Synergistics model, which is personalised.
Now, you just heard Tony talking about the kind of less tangible aspects like staff behaviours. They're really important. They're actually quite critical, because if staff demonstrate that they're not coming along the journey, if they demonstrate they're resisting, it doesn't matter what you measure in a quantitative sense, it's not going to succeed. So think very clearly about how you'd know that staff are psychologically ready to come on the journey, and what you would observe in a very qualitative way in terms of their responses to the change process.